just finished reading Tribe of Mentors, the latest book by Tim Ferriss.
And this book is interesting. You know, it's at first a little bit more boring than Tools of Titans, his last similarly huge book full of interviews with a lot of different people, because basically all he does is repeatedly ask the same, I think there's like 6 or 7 questions, and he asks those same questions to all of the people listed in the book. And so at first, you know, especially if it's a book that you're going to be sitting down and reading for a while, that gets a little bit repetitive, but that leads into what this book is good for. So I've been using this book in my morning routine. For 15 minutes, I do my journaling, and then I do a 15-minute session of reading something motivational. So this book is great for that because in 15 minutes, you can read a couple different people's interviews, and you get a good motivational burst for your day. It would also be good for people who want to have a book around that whenever you're feeling unmotivated, like if you're a creative entrepreneur or something like that, you could just pick this book up, randomly flip into it to somebody like Neil Strauss and read their section, or even read a specific question in there that would be useful. For example, one of the questions is, when you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do you do? One tactic would be to, when oneself is feeling that, to pick up a book like this and look at those specific questions. That being said, I checked it out from the library. That's why it has these temporary sticky notes instead of writing in it. So it's something you can do from the library, but it's going to be an interesting read. You're probably not going to want to sit down and read this book for an hour. So I'm going to flip through. I have to pull out all these sticky notes before I return it to the library today. And there's a couple things in here that got extra sticky notes. All right, one of my favorite books is The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. And Steven Pressfield is awesome. That book, The War of Art, is super motivating. If you ever are procrastinating, read that book or listen to it on audio, and Steven Pressfield will whoop your butt and make you get back to work. So he's got this part in here. Here's a great thing. One of the questions that Tim Ferriss asks everybody is, if you had a gigantic billboard with anything on it, what would it say and why? And usually people have these quotes by Albert Einstein or whatever. And Steven Pressfield says, I would not have a billboard, and I would take down every billboard that everybody else has put up. Very good. No one else had an answer like that, so that's pretty cool. So then in this question, there's a part, one of the questions that Tim asks everybody is, what are bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise? Well, Steven Pressfield goes on a little bit of a rant, and he says, the disease of our times is that we live on the surface. We're like the Platte River, a mile wide and an inch deep. I always say, if you want to become a billionaire, invent something that will allow people to indulge their own resistance. Somebody did invent that. It's called the internet, social media, that wonderland where we can flirt from one superficial jerk-off distraction to another, always remaining on the surface, never going deeper than an inch. Real work and real satisfaction come from the opposite of what the web provides. They come from going deep into something, the book you're writing, the album, the movie, and staying there for a long, long time. So resistance is Steven Pressfield's code word or specific word for procrastination, and sort of that part of you that wants to go get a snack instead of continuing to work on your manuscript. So anyways, I love that. Steven Pressfield is a badass. Definitely check out his books. He interviews a bunch of poker players in this book, which is kind of interesting. And in this interview, he talks to Annie Duke. In this last part here, after being asked, how has a failure or apparent failure set you up for later success? She says, poker has taught me to disconnect failure from outcomes. Just because I lose doesn't mean I failed, and just because I won doesn't mean I succeeded. Not when you define success and failure around making good decisions that will win in the long run. What matters is the decisions I made along the way, and every decision failure is an opportunity to learn and adjust my strategy going forward. By doing this, losing becomes a less emotional experience and more an opportunity to explore and learn. I thought that was a really deep answer to the question. So I could spend a while talking about all of the awesome people that he interviews in here, because that's definitely one of the big takeaways from this book, is that these are some pretty incredible people. And for anyone, there will be a few that you really identify with more than others, but he interviews Esther Perel, who I feel like I've heard of before, but when I read this, I was really impressed by her. But one of the things that I was really impressed by is one of the other questions that he asks all of these people is, what advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the real world? What advice should they ignore? And so Esther Perel says, life will present you with unexpected opportunities, and you won't always know in advance which are the important moments. Above all, it's the quality of your relationships that will determine the quality of your life. Invest in your connections, even those that seem inconsequential. So I really resonated with this quote because, or I should say this quote really resonated with me, but I just always have been convinced that the relationships are the most important part, whether it's in science, like the study of ecology, which is the study of relationships between organisms, has always been much more compelling to me. And in the same way, human relationships is something that have been fascinated by, especially in the last, I would say, 5 years or so. So that felt really reaffirming to read that, because it's one of those things too that you can tell that it's important by asking people who are close to death or at the end of their, towards the end of their life, what was important for them and what really mattered. And relationships with other people is obviously one of the top things that they mention. And another part that's sort of connected to that is when he asks her the question, when you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, what do you do? And she talks about how she seeks out other people in her network of friends, family, colleagues, and helps use their human GPS to help her recalculate and find her path. So she says, in moments when you don't believe in yourself, you need other people who believe in you. They can hold you up when you falter and keep you from hitting the ground. Other people see you differently from the way you see yourself. And that multiplicity of perspectives is essential to making us who we are. Identity is always a two-way street, created from the inside out and the outside in. So I feel like that's key, because when you're going through a difficult period, it's amazing how our self-talk, how we can treat ourselves or talk to ourselves internally in a way that we would never talk to one of our friends. We have this sort of weird double standard, and you need to figure out how to be kind to yourself or be effective in your self-talk and not develop the tendency of always saying, for example, people say things like, oh, Marley, that was stupid, or like, if I drop something or whatever, and there's this litmus test that you can do, is like, is this something that you would say to one of your friends? And usually it isn't. So this is, when you're going through a difficult period emotionally, checking in with other people who know you is so helpful. And so I really was impressed by that quote by her. You can see that I have sticky notes throughout this book, and it's unfortunate I have to return it suddenly, but that means that someone else at the library is asking for it. And here we go, there's a bunch of sticky notes right here. So this is Nick Szabo. He's worked a lot on cryptocurrencies and stuff like that. So what advice would you give to a smart, driven college student about to enter the real world? Everybody is striving after social proof, from a close friend's adulation to online likes and upvotes. The less you need positive feedback on your ideas, the more original design regions you can explore, and the more creative and in the long term useful to society you will be. but it could be a very long time before people will love you or even pay you for it. The more original your idea is, the less your bosses and peers will understand them, and people fear or at best ignore what they do not understand. So this is funny because in a way, this is almost different from what Esther Perel was kind of saying in her last bit about what to do when you're overwhelmed. So this is one of the things that you can learn when you see a lot of people side by side is what are the patterns. So this pattern of like caring what other people think versus not caring what other people think is a critical balance in life, especially for people who are trying to develop original work. So what this guy Nick Szabo is saying is that if you're always paying attention and looking at like other artists' work, you are going to have more trouble creating something original. And there's a Joseph Campbell quote that I wish I could remember right now, but Nick Szabo kind of summarizes it when he says that society actually needs those people who go away from society and reject society to a degree to come up with new ideas, and then those ideas come back to society, and that is actually how society really evolves. So knowing when you're feeling down or whatever, to bring in your social support group, and then when you need to create original ideas, knowing that that might be a time to be by yourself a little bit more. So that's another way that a book like this could be great, is just helping you dial in those tactics in your life. So here's one by this guy, Chris Anderson, who runs the TED conference talks. So he, in his advice for college students, he says, many of us have bought into the cliche, pursue your passion. Me? I don't know, maybe. For many, that is actually terrible advice. In your 20s, you may not really know what your best skills and opportunities are. It's much better to pursue learning, personal discipline, growth, and to seek out connections with people across the planet. For a while, it's just fine to follow and support someone else's dream. In so doing, you will be building valuable relationships, valuable knowledge, and at some point, your passion will come and whisper in your ear, I'm ready. That was deep. I thought that was especially good for a friend of mine that I know, and I didn't really know what my passion was in my 20s, and I wish I had a book like this. Dr. Jim Lower, he's a coach, athletic performance, peak performance kind of coach, well known. He's, worked with hundreds of world-class performers in sports, law enforcement, military, business, blah, blah, blah. Lots of gold medalists. And he says, one of the questions, this is a really good one. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life? A lot of people in this book talk about meditation. It's a good takeaway. The practice of daily journaling has been a remarkable tool in helping me navigate the storms of life and be my best self through it all. Journaling, woo! So yeah, he's not the only person that mentions journaling in this book, but he gives it like he gives like 4 or 5 paragraphs or more to journaling, and he says something about, they did this study on athletes where they required them to keep a detailed training journal on a daily basis. An important insight in the study gained over several years was that anything that was quantified and tracked on a regular basis in their journals would invariably show improvement, including sleep times, liquid intake, stretching frequency, nutritional habits, etc. Quantifying behavior raises awareness, and as a consequence, habit acquisition times are typically accelerated. Eventually, we applied this understanding to mental and emotional training, using daily journal entries to quantify the frequency of positive versus negative thinking, giving 100% effort in practice, engagement levels, the tone and contents of one's private voice, anger management, etc. produce similarly exciting results. Because of these insights, I decided to take up daily journaling myself. After only a few weeks, the only regret I had was that I hadn't started the process much earlier in my life. So, super great recommendation for journaling. You can see some of my other videos if you want more about journaling, because y'all know that I'm super into journaling. And then the last thing from Jim Laura is about stress. And I think this is really important. People get confused about what stress means. And here he says, a piece of bad advice that he hears is protect yourself from stress and your life will be better. Protection from stress serves only to erode my capacity to handle it. Stress exposure is the stimulus for all growth. And this is going to sort of more the biological or the real definition of stress is not necessarily like negative. And growth actually occurs during episodes of recovery. Avoiding stress, I have learned, will never provide the capacity that life demands of me. For me, balancing episodes of stress with equivalent doses of recovery is the answer. So you can think about your life in that way. And I think that's important for sometimes, we might be a little bit self-critical with ourselves about like feeling indulgent sometimes, or like, oh, a massage or vacation or whatever. So I think the important thing is to understand like when you're in recovery mode and when you're doing self-care and when you're pushing yourself and exposing yourself to those stresses that make you stronger. So for me, for example, one thing that is stressful is journaling or drawing in public situations. So like the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco has this amazing aquarium that's open to the public. I love drawing fish, and part of me would prefer to be there when there's not thousands of people milling around and lots of noise. But at the same time, exposing myself to that stressful situation and drawing in a place like that, it forces me to be more confident in my art, and it's like what I call a resistance training. So don't avoid stress altogether, and if you want a book to help motivate you and give you some technical strategies that you can implement right away, I recommend at the very least check it out from your local library. Look, see, it's new. Otherwise, this might be worth buying. Don't listen to this on audiobook. I mean, I haven't tried listening to it, but this is the kind of book that doesn't turn out well on audiobook. So either get it at your library or buy it. It's a good one. Tim Ferriss. Try it.